Welcome to the Praxis Report, the podcast where theory meets practice and where politics and current events are dissected from a revolutionary lens. I'm your co-host, Jonathan Brown,
And I'm your other co-host, William Barth.
and today we're going to be talking about a big event that happened last week in the news. During the inauguration of Donald Trump, one of Trump's primary billionaire backers, Elon Musk, giving a campaign speech, appeared to be giving a Nazi salute or a Hitler salute. And so we're going to show you guys a video clip of that. And we're going to discuss what is fascism, what is Nazism, and why has this ideology that was defeated supposedly after World War II, why has it been resurrected? So first, let's pull up this clip. Okay, so this is the fascist style salute at the Trump inauguration.
I just want to say thank you for making it happen. Thank you.
Yeah.
The heart goes out to you.
Yeah, he did it. He did it.
So, Will, what are your initial thoughts just watching that video?
Well, someone who has, my background is in minority rights and international rights of minority groups and multiculturalism. And this subject of Nazi salutes, Confederate flags, they play an important role in setting an atmosphere that a sort of public atmosphere that tolerates hate and hate speech. Now, in different countries take different approaches towards hate speech. Some take more active roles. Some, like the United States, take more what you might call a libertarian role. When I say libertarian, I mean we have sort of a First Amendment, extremist First Amendment view that
Free speech and all that.
yeah, horrible ideas and horrible symbols like Nazi symbols or Confederate symbols that represent not only hate, but actual mass murder of people, whether you're talking about the mass murder of European Jewry or the enslavement of Africans and African Americans in the United States and the subsequent segregation of African Americans in the United States. Whatever you're talking about, some countries like Germany, Canada, and other countries in Europe take more activist roles to bar hate speech and hate symbolism, like you just witnessed, and they actually criminalize it and take an active role because they believe that it sets an atmosphere that actually promotes what eventually became Nazism or fascism or actions that not only subjugated minority groups but mass murdered them.
Yeah.
Also, it's insulting and hurtful for the groups that were murdered and tortured and enslaved by these symbols. It's insulting and painful to watch for members of these groups, and so that's the view I take of it. That
Right.
in the United States we take a libertarian view of it. We allow it because it's free speech. But in Europe, it's a little more advanced. Europe says no. Hate speech is despite First Amendment protections, hate speech cannot be tolerated because of what it leads to. And so that's the issue at hand, and that maybe sets the stage for the
What do you,
discussion.
what's the counter argument to what you're saying here, presented by the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL? So for our listeners, the ADL is a part of a civil rights organization, or at least a self-proclaimed civil rights organization.
It was at one time.
And it was historically, perhaps at one time in the early 20th century. But it was founded to primarily defend Jews against anti-Semitism in the early 20th century. And of course, supposedly all groups against bigotry and hate speech and things like that. But today, the ADL's primary job is lobbying on behalf of the state of Israel and censoring and silencing and smearing anyone, including Jews, who are critical of Israel. Now, you would expect the premier anti-Semitic lobby in the United States to criticize Elon Musk. So let's see what the ADL had to say about this. So here is their statement on Twitter. The ADL wrote, "This is a delicate moment. It's a new day, and yet so many are on edge. Our politics are inflamed, and social media only adds to the anxiety. It seems that Elon Musk made an awkward gesture in a moment of enthusiasm, not a Nazi salute. But again, we appreciate that people are on edge." So they say here, awkward gesture in a moment of enthusiasm, not a Nazi salute. So the again, the ADL, which claims to be the leading civil rights organization, the leading group that fights anti-Semitism, is making excuses, apologizing, if you will, for a Nazi salute from a powerful billionaire. What does that mean?
Yes.
Does that discredit the ADL?
Full disclosure, John, I served while a student at Loyola Law School. I served as a legal intern for the Anti-Defamation League of the
Okay,
B'nai B'rith.
good.
So I did do an internship there. I later resigned, I should also say, from the ADL over a dispute I had with the ADL over affirmative action. I'm a
They
big
opposed,
supporter.
right?
I'm a big supporter of. I've dedicated my life to desegregation and affirmative action. Segregation to me is a crime against humanity, and affirmative action is the tool we use to desegregate society. The ADL opposed affirmative action, which to me is opposing desegregation. So we had that disagreement. I wrote a legal brief in opposition to the ADL position when I worked there, and tried to convince them to change their position. Obviously, I was unsuccessful. But
Well, the
anyway,
ADL still supports segregation. That's why they're huge defenders of the state of Israel. They support apartheid in America, and
yeah,
this,
their argument to me was that Jews were excluded by exclusionary quotas in the 1920s and 1930s out of universities.
yeah,
So therefore they're against inclusionary desegregation quotas or tools to
right.
desegregate, such as affirmative action,
But what I want to
which is okay. I didn't mean to
yeah,
delve off.
I want to
But
get to
that
the
is the
question.
proper role of affirmative action, is desegregation. But let's move on.
Yeah, because the question, I mean, of course, desegregation, an important topic, but in this instance, I think it's fascinating that Zionists are defending Nazism. And we also have not just the ADL doing this thing, but an even bigger fish, Benjamin Netanyahu. So let me see if I can pull up. Here is Benjamin Netanyahu's Twitter account saying Elon Musk is being falsely smeared. Elon is a great friend of Israel. He visited Israel after October 7th massacre, in which Hamas terrorists committed the worst atrocity against the Jewish people since the Holocaust. He has since repeatedly and forcefully supported Israel's right to defend itself against the genocidal terrorists and regimes who seek to annihilate the one and only Jewish state. I thank him for this. So here is the prime minister who claims he is the leader of the entire Jewish people, who is thanking a man who gave a Nazi salute. Because according to him, it doesn't matter if you're a Nazi as long as you defend the state of Israel's actions. So that's where we're at in the Jewish world right now.
Yeah, it's almost difficult to understand.
Our the
Very.
Jewish leadership, so-called, I put that in quotes, the Jewish leaders, because they're unelected by us. But uh, there's this long history of Zionist groups who will align with any of the most nefarious forces on the planet as long as those people support the state of Israel. Way back in the 1930s, when the Nazis first came to power in Germany, there were attempts by the Zionists to get the Nazis to expel the Jewish population from Germany into Palestine. And since then, the Zionist groups in Israel have collaborated with every sort of right wing extremist, Christian nationalist, fundamentalist, whatever have you. As long as those groups will support the Jewish state, support the state of Israel, then the Zionists have no problem with them. On the other hand, if you are a Jew and you say, I believe there should be a free Palestine, then you're a self hating Jew, then you're an anti Semite, then you're a Hamas terrorist, then you need to be fired from your job, expelled from public life. So that's the priorities of Zionists and our ideology of Nazism today. That if you support Hamas or if you support Israel, you're good, even if you're a Nazi. But if you support the Palestinians, then you're a terrorist and an anti-Semite.
Yes, the extreme right, the radical right, the Netanyahu Trump right has sort of taken the pulpit, if you will. The and somehow they managed to claim the role of speaking for the Jewish people, and that's it's very, very unfortunate. I mean, this Netanyahu guy is now he's an indicted criminal by the International Criminal Court. So with the charges of crimes against humanity against him. So the he's worse than a gangster. Um,
Right.
that's who speaks for the Jewish people. I mean, I've always argued the regime in Israel that controls the place is illicit because the Arab Israelis who live in Jerusalem and West Bank and Gaza have no voting rights in the Knesset, so have no human rights, period. So
Right.
I don't think the regime is a legitimate regime.
No, it's not. And I think that this sort of exposes in the eyes of the world, people are outraged by the actions of Elon Musk. And then here they see the ADL and the Prime Minister of Israel defending it. So I think that further delegitimizes Israel in the eyes of most of the civilized world. So I think at this point, Israel is boxing itself into a corner where its only allies are going to be the most openly racist, barbaric, brutal, savage warmongers of Western society. And I think
Yes.
no one else is going to be supporting them. It's long gone, this idea that they always used to say that, Israel is a bipartisan consensus and Israel is a, beautiful liberal democracy. Israel is leaning heavily into no, it's an openly fascist, terroristic state at this point, in my opinion. And
Yeah.
that's how they carry themselves. That's who they align themselves with. And less and less they're even trying to hide it.
It's not just your opinion. I mean, again, we can attack institutions of international law, like the International Criminal Court at The Hague. But as we've pointed out and discussed in other episodes, international law is, just civilization. That's the point civilization has evolved to have international law, whether you're talking about the United Nations, International Criminal Court at The Hague, and other institutions that give us at least some semblance of a civilized world system. It's not a world government. There's no world president or leader, but there are these institutions like international courts, and they try to do justice, and they will here. This I mean we don't just hope. It's happened in Rwanda. It happened in Serbia and former Yugoslavia, and it can happen in Israel, Palestine. So
Um,
let's hope that.
yeah, and I think Netanyahu and the rest of the Israeli leadership are sort of international pariahs at this point, where there are
Yeah,
certain countries where they cannot step foot on
that's
without
right.
extradite it.
And
Uh,
eventually one will, and they'll be picked up and prosecuted.
even not even a leadership, but Israeli soldiers. There was a story the other day, an Israeli soldier who served in Gaza who had posted videos of himself committing war crimes. He posted these on his social media, and he was laughing. He was killing
Right.
innocent people and laughing like a maniac, and
Yeah.
posted that. And he was on vacation in somewhere, I think Brazil or something, and the government it was somewhere in South America, and the government attempted to arrest him and try him for war crimes, bring him to the Hague, and he fled the country quickly and went back to Israel. So we're going to have the situation where Israeli citizens, Israeli soldiers, cannot leave their own country, perhaps come to the United States, but nowhere else in the world will they be accepted to go.
Right. Right.
But yeah, let's move on to another topic which I want to get into. So we kind of discussed the Zionist angle, which is that unfortunately the historical victims of the Holocaust, which is the Jewish people, our so-called leaders, our Zionist leadership, has decided that they are going to be a complete moral failure and they're going to embrace the new fascist Nazi parties, as long as those groups align with Zionism. However, this leads us to a question, what is fascism and how do we best fight against fascism? We have heard, Will, for the last several years, this sort of hysteria around Donald Trump that liberals have kind of been saying since 2015 when he first started running for office that Trump is a Nazi, he's Hitler, he's a fascist, he's a dictator, he's an authoritarian. And they've sort of having gone full scale into Trump equals fascist, and a lot of people on the left have agreed with that analysis. I myself have been critical of that perspective, and I think that it leads us to this question of what fascism is, how we define fascism. So
Right.
there's a video clip, a little clip. I want to show just a short segment of the historian and political scientist Norman Finkelstein, who does great work analyzing the situation in Gaza. And Finkelstein, whose parents were Holocaust survivors in the Warsaw Ghetto, uh, has just this little minute or two clip where he talks about his view on why he doesn't think what Trump represents
Right.
is fascism. So let's watch this real quick, and we'll respond to it.
If you take words seriously, this word fascism, there isn't a danger of fascism here. You know why? Because there's no opposition. Historically, fascist elements came into power when there was a strong left. The institutions of what we used to call bourgeois democracy were in jeopardy, and the ruling elites acquiesced in a strongman coming into power in order to repress the elements on the left, which posed a real danger to their system. They wanted a socialist society. Some wanted a communist society. All of them rejected the capitalist society. We don't have a left here. So we don't need, if you take people in the Supreme Court, people like Justice Roberts. I've studied Roberts because I teach Supreme Court law. Okay, Justice Roberts, Justice Gorsuch, Justice Alito. They love our institutions. They're in love with our Constitution. They love checks and balances. Because the whole purpose of the checks and balances is to make sure the rabble doesn't get out of hand.
That's a
Okay,
good line.
so
Good
so I,
line.
I I thought that was a very fascinating clip from Finkelstein.
Yeah.
And it's contrarian. He's a contrarian because he's not afraid to go against the established
Right. View.
view on the American left that Trump is a fascist, Trump is a Nazi.
Right.
So summarizing that in my words, what he's saying is that historically, like let's say in Italy and Germany and Japan, back in the time of the World War II period, fascism came to power because the normal institutions of bourgeois democracy, liberal democracy, were not able to resist the rise of the socialist and communist movements. And in order to defend themselves from the crisis of the communist revolution, fascists had to take power, overthrow the institutions of liberal democracy, and institute a sort of open dictatorship to control, destroy the elements of communism, and stabilize that society. And in Finkelstein's analysis, America does not need an open dictatorship yet because we don't have an opposition. There is no communist opposition in the United States that is strong enough to be a challenge. So why would they overthrow our liberal institutions? Will, what is your take on that? What do you that analysis?
These are very difficult, academic questions. I mean, my sort of my instinctual response is that history will determine this question. we'll see what happens. So the definition of fascism as some sort of wedding of corporate power with militarism, that sort of a definition seems to be consistent with what Trump is attempting to do. Appointing billionaires like Musk and so forth, and all these billionaires in his cabinet, and sort of doing the bidding of corporate America, of the big energy oil companies and so forth, and then building up the military. At the same time, though, Trump has this sort of peace offensive where he talks about the dangers of nuclear, global thermonuclear war, of a nuclear exchange, his strike for peace in both Ukraine and Palestine. So it's sort of inconsistent in a way. And I wonder if it's a distinction without a difference. Does it really matter? I mean, whether Trump fits into the traditional sort of European definition of what European fascism was like under Mussolini or Hitler or any of the other fascist leaders that emerged prior to World War II, or whether we're just simply saying what we were talking about a little earlier, John, before we came onto the podcast today, just some sort of a general movement as to where the whole electoral system in the United States is moving. We do have the defeat of liberal Democrats. They were routed in the last election. Fascism tends to be popular, and Trump is extremely popular. But what distinguishes Trump, I think, from these traditional fascist definitions, again, is his strike for peace. I mean, his first act is to what? Pressure Israel into a ceasefire arrangement with Hamas. Incredible. That's just absolutely incredible, and it's totally contrary to fascism. A fascist would have said, let's complete the genocide of the Palestinian people and just start mass murdering all of them, men, women, and children, as many hundreds of thousands as we can murder. That's what a fascist would have done. And that's what Netanyahu would like to do. But Trump said, no, let's just stop and make a deal with the Saudis, who are, more than, and the other, Arab powers, powers in the Arab world, who are anti-democratic, certainly, whether it be Qatar or the United Arab Emirates or Saudi Arabia. So Trump seems to be more in sort of aligned with those forces, and because that's where the money is, and
Right.
that's
I think your analysis is correct that there's this convergence between the bourgeoisie, the billionaires, and the oligarchs, and the state, with Trump staffing his cabinet with outright billionaire oligarchs. Uh,
right.
so where I think you asked this question a second ago, what is the distinction between fascist or not a fascist? I think the difference for me is how we define Trump would lead us to what sort of actions we take in response to Trump. And what I liked about the Finkelstein video is that Finkelstein is using the Marxist definition of fascism, which he's speaking about the class character of fascism, that fascism arises when capitalism is in a state of crisis, brought out by the rise of a strong socialist opposition, at which point fascism emerges that has to suspend liberal democracy and institute an openly terroristic dictatorship run by the financial oligarchy. However, liberals, when they talk about fascism, that is not what they're referring to. They refer to a psychological or individualistic, personality driven approach to fascism. To them, to liberals, fascism is just when you're a mean person, when you're used, Trump says things that are bad. He says offensive things. He's an outlandish, crazy personality who's very boorish and offensive and racist. So to them, they're not thinking of a class character to fascist movement. They're just saying Trump as a single individual is the problem. And if we could just get rid of Trump and put in a nice, neoliberal who looks stately and looks like a traditional politician, then the system would be good. And so I think that's the problem, is that the liberals want to focus all their energy on Trump the individual, Trump the personality, and they're ignoring the Marxist element, which is the class contradictions of the monopoly financial oligarchs who are controlling our institutions. And so I would say it's more our institutions are breaking down and pushing in a more openly fascist direction. But I don't think liberals are going to stop that. They want to preserve those institutions. They just want the veneer of respectability and liberalism behind these institutions that are completely illiberal. What do you think? I don't know. What do you think?
I think what you just said was just a stellar A plus analysis. I mean, it's just really,
About?
really, really, really well crafted, and it was a complete paradigm. You really illustrated what the problem is. We've talked about this in prior episodes. I mean, the problem with
Personality driven politics.
yeah, the problem with our politics, broadly speaking, which is it's the politics of personality. There's really not much of a class element in it. The American voter votes for the person, not the party. They don't care about the party. So, in other words, the ideology, the philosophy, the public policies, they don't matter. It's the person. Do you want to have a beer with them, or do you not want to have a beer with them? Are they an authoritarian madman, or are they a nice guy or a nice person like the Cheney family, Dick and Liz Cheney, the architects of the horrific wars on Afghanistan, the longest, I think it's the longest war in American history,
Yeah.
which we lost, by the way, and the war on Iraq. We're still occupying Iraq against the will of the Iraqi people, and countless other wars which they would have wanted to promote. These are welcome allies of the modern day liberal Democrat. The Cheney families are welcome with open arms. Kamala Harris, the Democratic Party nominee, campaigned openly with the Cheney family at her side, parroting the same type of foreign policy, which is, as you point out, a sort of well, it's a more than neoconservative. It's sort of a neo-fascist foreign policy, if you really want to break it down. We're going to talk about this in later episodes. U.S. funding for paramilitary right-wing groups in Ukraine, not Nazi battalions in Ukraine, and so forth. So yes, it's the problem with American politics generally, and the Democratic or parties definitions here really fall short, as your critique really eloquently summed it up, I think.
Yeah, I think the thing that we always talk about in the show is we critique both the bipartisan neoliberal, neoconservative agenda. We critique both parties. And I think, in my view, both parties, the institutions of capitalist society, are accelerating us towards a trajectory of permanent war abroad, and at home, this sort of low wage, debt slavery police state where freedoms are eroding and all our institutions are failing. And I
Very
think
grim.
it's
Very
both of
grim.
those things. It's the Democrats and Republicans. But my problem with the liberals calling Trump a fascist is that they don't call Biden a fascist. They don't call Harris a fascist. They don't call Cheney a fascist. They only think Trump is the fascist because Trump is more overt and more open and more brazen about it. But it's not that Biden didn't put a bunch of oligarchs in his administration, and Biden was not just a puppet of the billionaires and the elite, because he was. In some estimations, Kamala Harris, when she ran, had more donations from wealthy oligarchs than Trump did. So really, both parties are guilty of the same thing. But I think when liberals blame Trump, they want to scapegoat Trump, and then doing so, they'll restore faith in the institutions of bourgeois democracy. We'll now have faith in the government, faith in the media, faith in the military, faith in NATO. faith in the CIA. The Democrats
Right.
have took on the mantle of being pro-establishment because they think Trump's a threat to the establishment. Whereas in
Right.
my view, it's the establishment itself that is the problem. And I think
That's
that's
right.
what our liberals are missing.
That's so well put, and that's the challenge. And again, we as we address on the show, okay, so what is to be done? What do we do about all this? And this is the kind of question I think you and I are going to theorize as time goes on.
I think just to one last thing I'll say on this topic is the Finkelstein interview. He mentioned in the 1930s there was an actual socialist and communist movement. The Soviet Union had recently come into being, and in Germany, I mean, actually throughout the entire Western world, the entire capitalist world was terrified of the fact that the Bolshevik Revolution was successful. Winston Churchill said, let's strangle this Bolshevik baby in its cradle. And 14 nations all across Western Europe and the United States invaded Russia to try to overthrow the communist government. And they ultimately failed. But there were strong communist parties throughout Europe at that time. And in Germany, Hitler, the Nazis, they were like the strongmen that would beat down the communists and restore pride and order to the German nation. So I think what we could take away from that is there needs to be a return to an actual opposition party, a communist party, a party of the working class, of the people in the United States that can be a counterbalance to the growing fascism. Because I think historically, the only thing that defeated fascism was a popular front with the communists. It wasn't the liberals that saved us from the Nazis. It was primarily the Soviet Union that did the heavy lifting, and that at the cost of 27 million Russian lives,
That's
uh,
right.
the Red Army is who stormed into Germany and defeated the Nazis. So I
Right.
think that is where we need to theorize and explore: is can we build a new kind of party for America, a communist party that can be a resistance to the fascist movement?
Right. And we'll look at it in the show. Or can we create a some sort of a quote unquote third party progressive or populist movement or response or political party, whether communist or simply progressive or populist. That's the question I think we should address. But it's certainly a subject that has not been addressed by anyone, and you're raising it, and that's very healthy and important.
Yeah, and let's hope for the best in the next 4 years to come. But I think things are rapidly accelerating, and we need to be ready for whatever comes because things are getting worse.
Right. Again, I think history ultimately will determine these questions, whether Finkelstein has it right or AOC has it right or whatever, whichever view you want to take. Again, I don't know if it's a distinction without a difference. Let's see how mass deportations are in fact implemented. Are we talking about concentration camps, or is Trump just simply using what he always seems to do, this sort of madman theory where he sort of acts in this crazy madman way, and then his bark is much worse than his bite, and then people are so grateful that he is not the madman that he seems like he is, and maybe it's just his style, and that's what works for him. But either way, history will determine it, and we'll have to take it as it comes. I think. But I think it's good public discourse, and at least we understand now the issue and how to theorize it and perhaps what we can do about it.
Yeah, and let's I think that's probably a good note to end on, but you mentioned the madman theory and his bark and his bite, and that'll be something we're going to discuss in our next episode. And in that regard, we're going to look at Trump's approach to peace, his peace offensive. And
Yes.
the biggest thing for the institutions and the elite in America, the establishment, they don't fear Trump's so-called fascism. What they fear about Trump is him making peace. They fear that Trump's going to, make peace with Russia and, go and, dismantle NATO or something. So the thing they fear is that Trump is not militaristic enough. whereas we're talking about a completely different critique of Trump.
That's right. And with that, though, John, I think we can wrap it up for today and tell our listeners if they like the podcast today and our Praxis report that examines these questions in ways that really I don't think many other analysts are doing. Please press the like button and improve our algorithms, as they say. And
Subscribe
of
to our
course,
channel.
and you can join on, is it Patreon, John? Is that
Join us on Patreon.
join us on Patreon? You'll get special benefits, and we'd like to bring you into the discussion because we'd really like, full public discourse on these questions. We think we're the only show in town that raises these sorts of questions about what is to be done. So please join us in that discussion, and then in the effort to try to move society forward and change things and have a response to the Donald Trumps and the neoconservative liberals and all the rest of them with some real progressive policies. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you at the next episode.